Like skiing has always been my escape, my way of finding peace in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by towering peaks and endless fields of untouched snow. But after what happened to me last winter, I don't think I'll ever set foot on a mountain again. It started when a group of my friends and I planned a weekend getaway to a remote ski resort in Montana. The place had been around for decades, but it wasn't as popular as the big-name resorts. That's what we liked about it. No crowds, no long lift lines, just us and the mountains. The lodge was small but cozy, a rustic wooden building at the base of the slopes with a roaring fireplace in the lobby and the faint smell of pine in the air. The first day was perfect. Fresh powder, clear blue skies, and long, exhilarating runs down the slopes. But as the sun set and the mountain cast long, eerie shadows over the snow, I began to feel off. A strange sense of unease settled over me, like we were being watched. I chalked it up to paranoia and exhaustion, but I couldn't shake the feeling. That night, as we sat around the fireplace, a man approached us. He was older, his face weathered and lined from years in the cold. He introduced himself as Hank, a local who had been skiing these mountains for over 40 years. His eyes were intense, filled with something I couldn't quite place. "You kids be careful up there," he warned. "These mountains don't like outsiders." We laughed it off, thinking he was just an old man trying to scare us. But then he told us about the vanishing skier. Years ago, a young man had gone skiing alone late in the afternoon, venturing into one of the more isolated trails. When he didn't return, a search party was sent out, but they never found him. No tracks, no signs of a struggle, just his ski poles standing upright in the snow as if he had planted them there and walked away. "Some say the mountain took him," Hank said, lowering his voice, "that it calls to people, lures them away." That night, I barely slept. The next morning, my friends wanted to explore some of the backcountry trails beyond the main runs. I was hesitant, but I didn't want to be the coward of the group. We took the lift to the highest point of the resort, where a narrow trail led into the deeper woods. The moment we passed the boundary markers, I felt a shift in the air, like we had stepped into another world. The snow was eerily untouched, despite the fact that this was supposedly a popular backcountry area. There were no other skiers, no tracks, no sounds except for the wind whistling through the trees. About an hour into our run, we stopped to take a break. That's when we noticed the ski poles. They were planted in the snow about 30 feet away, standing perfectly upright. "Dude, that's creepy," my friend Jake muttered. We hesitated, but curiosity got the best of us. As we skied closer, my stomach dropped. The poles were old, weathered, and partially buried in the snow, as if they had been there for years. And just beyond them, a single set of footprints leading away from the poles and vanishing into the trees. We stood in silence, our breath coming in nervous puffs of steam. Then, in the distance, we heard something. A whisper, a voice carried by the wind, calling out in a hollow, broken tone. "Help me." The hair on the back of my neck stood up. "Let's get out of here," I said, my voice shaking. We turned and skied as fast as we could back toward the resort, but the mountain didn't want to let us go. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, and the snow beneath us seemed to shift, pulling us in deeper. I could swear I saw a movement in my peripheral vision. Something darting between the trees, keeping pace with us. When we finally burst out of the woods and onto the main trail, we didn't stop until we reached the lodge. Hank was waiting for us, his expression grim. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked. We nodded, breathless and pale. Hank sighed and stared out the window at the mountain. "Some people say that skier never really left, that he's still out there, looking for a way home." The next morning we cut our trip short. None of us wanted to spend another night near that mountain. But the worst part? Before we left, I decided to take one last look at the backcountry trail. And there, just beyond the tree line, stood a single set of ski poles, planted upright in the snow, waiting for the next person to come too close. 。 I've been skiing since I was a kid, so I like to think I know my way around the slopes. My family took annual trips to different ski resorts, and I always looked forward to them. But there was one trip that changed the way I see the mountains forever. It was a solo trip this time. My friends had bailed last minute, and I figured I'd go anyway. Just me, my gear, and miles of untouched powder at a quiet ski lodge tucked away in the Rockies. I arrived at the lodge in the late afternoon, checked into my room, and prepared for a couple of days of peaceful skiing. The lodge was cozy but outdated. A large fireplace roared in the common area, and the guests seemed friendly enough, but the staff seemed uneasy. Not rude, just distant. I shrugged it off and settled in for an early night. The next morning, I hit the slopes. The resort wasn't large, but it had a solid variety of trails. I stuck to the advanced runs, carving my way through fresh snow under a bright blue sky. By lunchtime, I was feeling bold. That's when I noticed it, a narrow, unmarked trail leading off the main route. It was strange. No signs, no barriers, just a clean, inviting trail leading into the woods. I pulled off to the side and took a quick break, staring down the mysterious path. I should have ignored it. I should have turned away and stuck to the marked trails. But I didn't. Adrenaline and curiosity got the better of me. I tightened my gloves, adjusted my goggles, and pushed off. At first, it was exhilarating. The snow was pristine, untouched by other skiers. The trees towered high above, their branches heavy with ice. The air was still, too still. I should have realized it then. There were no other skiers, no distant chatter, no sound of chairlifts. Just me and the wind. Then I saw something ahead, a figure, the man in white. He was standing just off the trail, his back turned to me. At first, I thought he was another skier, but as I got closer, something felt off. His stance was rigid, unnatural. He was dressed in all white. White parka, white pants, even white gloves. His head was slightly tilted, like he was listening for something. I slowed down, debating whether to call out, but as I neared, he suddenly turned. I almost fell over. His face? There was no face. Just a smooth, pale surface, like untouched snow. No eyes, no mouth, nothing. A jolt of terror shot through me. My instincts screamed at me to run. I tried to turn my skis, but the snow beneath me suddenly felt wrong, like it was pulling me in. The trees seemed closer now, like the forest was shifting around me. And then, the man started moving toward me. Not skiing, not walking, just gliding over the snow, his faceless head locked onto me. I panicked. I shoved myself backward, forcing my skis to slide in the opposite direction. My heart pounded as I fought against the eerie pull of the snow. I skied faster than I ever had in my life, adrenaline making my limbs move on pure survival instinct. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see how close he was. The trees blurred past me, the wind roared in my ears, and just when I thought I couldn't push any harder, I burst out onto a main trail. I nearly collapsed in relief. The sounds of other skiers, the distant hum of the chairlift, and the crisp mountain air grounded me. I turned, half expecting to see the faceless man behind me. But the trail was gone. I blinked. It had been right there, the narrow opening in the trees. It wasn't there anymore, just an unbroken wall of snow-covered pines. I skied straight back to the lodge. I was shaking, breathless, but I needed answers. I approached the front desk, trying to keep my voice steady. The unmarked trail? Down past the ridge, I started. Where does it lead? The woman at the desk paled. Her eyes darted to the older man beside her, who set down his newspaper. You saw him, didn't you? He asked quietly. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The old man sighed. Years ago, there was a skier. He went missing after taking an off-trail route. They searched for weeks but never found him. No tracks, no body, just gone. I felt sick. The thing is, he continued, lowering his voice, people still see him. A man in white. standing in the woods. Some say he's trying to find his way back. Others say he's looking for someone to take his place. I left the next morning. I haven't gone skiing alone since. I've always loved skiing. The crisp mountain air, the feeling of gliding over snow, and the rush of adrenaline as I carved through fresh powder. But after what happened last winter, I don't think I'll ever set foot on a mountain again. This is the story of the night I should have died on Black Hollow Peak. It started as a routine trip. A long weekend at Black Hollow Resort with my best friend, Mark, and his girlfriend, Lisa. We had planned everything. 3 days of skiing, a cozy lodge to stay in, and an itinerary packed with adventure. The only problem? A massive storm was rolling in, one that was expected to hit the resort by nightfall. The resort staff warned everyone to be off the slopes by 4 p.m. Visibility would drop to near zero, and the winds would be too strong for the lifts to run. But Mark, being the thrill seeker he was, convinced me to go for one last run before heading back to the lodge. On man, it'll be epic. No one will be out there, just us and the mountain. Grinned, tightening his boots. Lisa didn't want to go. She called us reckless and said she'd wait at the lodge. I should have listened to her. But instead, I followed Mark up the lift to Black Hollow's backcountry trail, a run that was technically off limits. At first, everything was perfect. The untouched snow was like silk beneath my skis, and the silence of the mountain was eerie but beautiful. We weaved between towering pines, carving our way down the ungroomed slope. But then the storm came faster than expected. One moment, we were cruising under a gray sky. The next, the world turned white. The wind howled like a living thing, and snowflakes pelted my goggles so hard I could barely keep my eyes open. I called out for Mark, but the wind swallowed my voice. The trees around me blurred into a shapeless mass of white and gray. I stopped. Nothing looked familiar. I had lost the trail. My phone had no signal. My gloves were already soaked through, and the cold started seeping into my bones. I yelled Mark's name again. This time I heard something call back. At first I thought it was Mark. The voice was distant, muffled by the wind, but unmistakably human. It called my name. Taylor, over here. I turned, heart pounding. A shadow moved through the swirling snow. It was too tall, too thin. Mark, I called hesitantly, taking a step toward it. The shadow didn't answer. Instead, it moved closer. Too fast. One moment it was 50 feet away, the next it was 10 feet in front of me. I could barely make out the shape. A figure in tattered ski gear, its face obscured by a hood and goggles. It shouldn't have been possible to move like that in knee-deep snow. My instincts screamed at me to run. I turned, trying to ski away, but the storm was too thick. I couldn't tell which way was safe. And then, the voice called again. This time, it was right behind me. Tyler, you shouldn't be here. A hand grabbed my shoulder. I don't remember much of what happened next. I flailed, trying to pull away, and lost my balance. My skis tangled, and I felt myself falling. Down, down, down. The world turned upside down as I tumbled through the snow. I hit something, a rock maybe, and pain exploded through my ribs. I kept falling until, finally, I landed in a deep, dark ravine. I gasped for air, my vision swimming. My legs throbbed, and my left wrist felt wrong. I tried to sit up, but the pain was too much. And then I saw them. Bodies. All around me, half buried in the snow, were people. Their ski jackets were faded, some ripped to shreds. Their goggles were cracked, revealing hollow, frozen eye sockets. Their faces were twisted in expressions of terror. I choked back a scream and tried to crawl away, but my injured leg wouldn't move. That's when I heard it. The whispering. The wind carried voices, dozens of them, whispering words I couldn't understand. And then, through the blizzard, they started moving. One by one, the frozen bodies began to rise. I was too injured to run. My mind screamed at me to wake up, that this was just a nightmare, but the pain in my ribs was all too real. The figures shambled toward me, their stiff limbs cracking with each movement. One of them, A woman with icicles clinging to her hair reached for me. I closed my eyes, expecting to feel her freezing grip wrap around my throat. Instead, I heard a familiar voice. "Tyler, wake up." I gasped as my eyes flew open. Mark was shaking me, his face barely visible through the snow. "Dude, what the hell? You fell off the ridge. I've been looking for you for hours." I stared at him, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The bodies, the people, they were right here. Mark looked around. There was nothing but untouched snow. He helped me to my feet, and somehow we made it back to the resort. I was treated for a concussion, 2 broken ribs, and a sprained wrist. The ski patrol said I was lucky I didn't freeze to death. I told them about the bodies in the ravine. They just exchanged glances. Later that night, when I was resting in the lodge, an old ski instructor approached me. He told me no one was supposed to ski Black Hollow's backcountry. Not since the avalanche of '82. 20 people were buried alive back then. Their bodies were never found. They haven't been back since, and I never will. Thank you for joining me on this terrifying journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and share. Stay tuned for more spine-chilling tales of the paranormal.